Almighty God, bless this video, guide me in this recording, and help me present the information in a clear and concise way, in an organized manner that would help the people watching this video understand you, Lord, and understand your heart and all the things that you want to teach us, Lord, because you've blessed us with the ability to understand the universe that you've created, and you've blessed us with the ability to read these symbols and to unlock the hidden messages behind these images, Lord. So we pray that you guide us on this journey and help open our eyes and see the spiritual wisdom that you have prepared for us. So this first slide is a picture of the seal of the Bohemian Club, which is a famous elite Illuminati occult social club in the Bay Area. And you'll see it's got the owl as a symbol. And so that's where we're going to be starting our sort of introduction to occult symbols. And before we really get going and analyze this, we need to ask ourselves, why is it important? Why are symbols important, and why should we be able to interpret them? And I think the answer lies in the fact that being able to interpret symbols and to, kind of use these images as placeholders for larger concepts is something that really makes us unique as human beings. And it's really one of the highest orders of our intelligence that we're able to kind of speak poetically and use these images and symbols as big ideas, and we can compress all these things into these sort of simple everyday occurrences, and there's a lot of wisdom hidden in these symbols, and I think God talks to us through symbols. The Bible is an extremely symbolic book, not saying that everything that happens in the Bible is a symbol. I mean, I believe that Jesus literally rose from the dead, and I believe all Christians, that's essential to our faith. But there are a lot of symbolism in the Bible, and let's start with this one from Isaiah, which warns us that, when the wicked people take over the world, this is what will happen. Thorns shall come up in their palaces, nettles and brambles in the fortresses thereof, and it'll be a habitation of dragons and a court for owls. So there's actually a lot of symbols in this one verse, the first being the thorns and nettles and brambles, and there's a lot of, botanical symbols in the Bible, the idea of the fruit of the Spirit and the difference between, fruit and nettles and thorns, and some trees bear good fruit and other trees bear brambly and thorny fruit, and I believe that, we should avoid, just in real life, we wouldn't eat things, we wouldn't try to, grasp the thorny bushes in the same way we shouldn't, associate with the symbols that are associated with these thorny philosophies like occultism and Gnosticism. So we need to ask ourselves, well, why the owl? Why are these occult groups using the owl as a symbol for one of their, groups, the Bohemian Club? And Bohemian Club is, of course, also associated with Bohemian Grove and the occult rituals that take place there, and we'll get more in depth into that in a moment. And this is a slide from one of these ceremonies called the Cremation of Care. This is one of the things that they do in the Bohemian Grove, and it's basically an offering to the pagan god Moloch, who in the Bohemian Club is represented as the owl. And you can see, this is a photo, you can see the large owl statue, idol right here, and then the robed figures creating this bonfire. And of course there's accusations that human sacrifice and child sacrifice occurs at the Bohemian Grove, and I do not have any hard evidence of that, although I suspect that lots of evil things go on there. And of course lots of powerful people associate former Presidents Bush Jr. and Sr., Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, pretty much Ronald Reagan, all the major political figures coming out of the United States have had some connection to the Bohemian Club and Bohemian Grove. And a lot of cross-dressing, that's all public record. They like to go, and of course the elite and the Bohemians themselves will say that it's simply a fun social club, and it's just a place where these rich, wealthy people can come and unwind and kind of let loose away. And I think that that's true. They are letting loose, but the extent and the nature of the activities that they do there are something that are very suspect, and things that we as regular citizens who aren't given access to these elite clubs, we should make ourselves aware of the kind of things that they do and ask ourselves why. Why are they associating with these pagan symbols and these occult symbols? So the owl is such an important symbol because it goes all the way back to Babylon, and most of these symbols do, because the Babylonians and the Egyptians really are kind of the soil from which a lot of the occult grows, and the symbols are really the vocabulary and alphabet of the occult world, and that's another reason why we need to familiarize ourselves with them so we can understand what is going on when they use them to communicate. And so this is a bas-relief of the pagan god Ishtar. And as you can see, there's actually, again, a lot of symbols here. But the two ones we're focusing on are the owls, and of course these look like they might be either hyenas or they might even be lions. And if they're lions, that's very, very telling, because we're going to be discussing lions more in a moment. But you can also notice the like claws and the talons that almost look avian or bird-like, and of course the wings, and then the loop. So all of these are very important symbols, and the Bible tells us that we should be trustful of these pagan gods, and that, you know, the Israelites and God's people have always kind of been led astray by these pagan philosophies, and the Bible is full of all these examples of the Israelites losing their faith in God, and of course that ultimately brings destruction upon them. So I think we need to be very cautious of using these symbols in our political world and in our daily life, because they have ramifications when we kind of get seduced by these occult philosophies. And unfortunately, I think God is really He's trying to give us a chance to repent before, you know, we kind of get consumed by this occult outlook and worldview that's really become so prevalent in the mainstream. And it was prevalent in the mainstream even in ancient times. From Ishtar, we have Athena. And she, of course, also had the owl as one of her companions and symbols. And it's very interesting to note that these owls are always associated with female gods. And of course, this actually is interesting. I didn't even notice this. These look like these could possibly be serpents. I mean, I understand if you don't see that, but these symbols up here are also very important, these spirals, and that has to do with they're sort of an Archimedean spiral, which has to do with the golden, or actually that's a logarithmic spiral, but regardless. And they continue being used to modern day, and this is a still from the classic Disney movie, The Sword and the Stone, and our good friend Archimedes, the familiar of Merlin. And this is just a lovely, fun movie, and I think that this slide is kind of a little wink at people who know these symbols. And the joke, of course, being that Merlin and the kind of wizards knew all about the New World before anybody else did. And in the same way that these occult and esoteric practices, are supposed to give people knowledge that the regular citizen and the normal people cannot be exposed to. Of course, this knowledge is not really knowledge, it's lies, and the devil is a liar. So we need to arm ourselves with the background to interpret these symbols and to know when they are being used. And this just is another clip of a Canadian magazine called Owl Magazine, and it's proud to be a brony is the title article. And you can notice in this young man's tattoos, over here is a lamb, and you can't really see it in this, so I blew it up over the side, and you can see the inverted pentagram right on the kind of third eye position here. And again, some people might say these satanic symbols in association with owls, it's just coincidence, but I think we need to be more skeptical than that, and we need to really ask ourselves, well, these symbols keep being popped up, and of course people familiar with the My Little Pony Friendship is Magic show know that there's a lot of unfortunate occult associations with that show, and some people may laugh at me or dismiss for reading that into the My Little Pony, but when you have a character like Rainbow Dash, and of course rainbows and somewhere over the rainbow and over 9,000, I think was the catchphrase of her, all those have occult associations, which maybe I'll go into in another video, but I leave that up to your own heart to determine whether you believe in this stuff. And so the second symbol we're going to be looking at is the dragon, and the dragon is another name for Satan or the devil, the great dragon, the serpent. And it's so interesting that this is actually a Chinese looking dragon, but all the cultures throughout the world have some sort of reptilian, dragon, snake creature that occurs in their iconography, and Europe is, an obvious example, but the Asian examples of dragons, and there's also South American and African dragons, and we need to ask ourselves, why are all these cultures associating with these fearsome, scaled beasts? And perhaps there's something more to these symbols than meets the eye. And here is the dragon being used on a National Reconnaissance Office mission patch, and of course also you have the diamond down here, another important occult symbol. And why does the dragon have the United States flag as its wings, and is this really a positive symbol, and is this something we want our military to represent us as? Because again, we are a democracy, and the military is supposed to do the will of the people, and I personally am not comfortable with all these occult images and satanic associations with, being used in the iconography of the military, and I think other people should be aware of this stuff, and we need to kind of spread the word that there are people in power who take these symbols and these beliefs very seriously, and we need to also take them seriously so we can resist as they try to impose, this kind of occult outlook on us. And this is another mission patch, and this is, I believe, for a meteorite defense system, and this Latin phrase down here means never before, never again. And the three-headed serpent is another important symbol. Those of you familiar with Hermes Trismegistus know that there's a story where he ties three serpents into a knot, and I think that that's what this patch is alluding to. And again, the reason I include these patches is to show that these symbols pop up in the most unlikely places, and that the people in power and the elite really are well versed in these symbols, and as I said earlier, we need to be as well, so we can kind of understand how they communicate with each other. And Jesus himself often used snake and reptilian metaphors to describe the Pharisees. Here we can see he calls them a generation of vipers, and I don't think that's an accident that he uses the snake or the viper as an insult, or not. I guess it's not really even an insult, it's more of an accurate description of these people who have been led astray by these evil demonic forces. And this last patch is from, actually, it's the Israeli paratroop brigade, and as I've mentioned in one of my other videos, is that the state of Israel is a kind of hotbed for the occult, and is sort of the center of the New World Order and the Illuminati. And of course, this is not an attack on the Jewish people, it is the attack on the synagogue of Satan, the people who say that they are Jews but are not, but are liars. And we need to really pay close attention to, all the similarities between these satanic images and the military and our governments, and it's really not an accident. And the winged serpent, or the feathered serpent, of course, also has to do with the Mesoamerican deity Quetzalcoatl, who was referred to as the feathered serpent. So the fact that you have the same symbol occurring in South America, or Central America, North America, and in the Middle East and the Near East is something that should give us pause. And again, for people who will dismiss all this as a coincidence, I think the feathered serpent and the inclusion of wings is kind of an odd, association with the serpent. So it seems like you're free to believe it's a coincidence. Those of us who are interested in spiritual things, I hope that we'll stay curious, and that we'll always try and ask what else is going on. And again, tying into the sort of synagogue of Satan and the occult world, the rabbit is another extremely important symbol. And this is actually a photo for Purim, the Jewish holiday where rabbits are associated. And I guess, somebody will dress up as a rabbit and take pictures. And again, these are just regular people. I don't mean to, when I said synagogue of Satan, I didn't mean to condemn these particular individuals in this photo. I just mean that the occult is real, and that the rabbit is an important symbol. And we can see it here. Those of you familiar with the phrase, down the rabbit hole, that's kind of a shorthand phrase in the conspiracy occult world of kind of how deep and how complex this hidden spiritual symbolic reality is, and of course it relates back to Lewis Carroll's great book, Alice in Wonderland, and its sequel, Through the Looking Glass. And Lewis Carroll really was a visionary, and his work is really, really interesting for those of us interested in the occult and in spirituality. And I think people who dismiss him as a children's author are missing a lot of the, especially mathematical kind of depth of his writing. And basically, I think what Lewis Carroll what he teaches us, among other things, is that, the whole idea of symbols and things being used as a placeholder for something else. So in Alice in Wonderland, there's tons of descriptions of lists and songs and kind of seemingly nonsense passages, but actually if you take the time to investigate these passages, you'll find that they actually are kind of representations of mathematical concepts. And I could do an entire video on Alice in Wonderland, but we'll just keep it to this one slide. But this picture especially has a lot of occult symbols here. Of course, the checkerboard tiles for the Masons, these multiple kind of veils or screens or curtains refers to of course, in the Temple of Solomon, the Holy of Holies was separated by a curtain, and the whole conspiracy world itself, it seems to be separated by curtains, where every time you think you've figured out, you've reached the bottom, there's another curtain there, and it goes deeper and deeper. And of course, in reality, these things go on infinitely, because the spiritual world is infinite. And you can see the white rabbit. And in pop culture, the white rabbit, you can find it everywhere. The Go Ask Alice or Jefferson Airplane's The White Rabbit. These are all just sort of hints and clues for people who are curious to kind of go on their journey and investigate, follow the white rabbit. I believe that was also in The Matrix, was another time that the white rabbit showed up. And the rabbit is an extremely old symbol, and in this particular slide we see it as the three hairs, which is predates the Abrahamic religions, although this photo and this image occurs in I believe it's from a synagogue in Poland. But of course, you can find the three-hair symbol on all kinds of churches, and it's, like I said, it's older than the Hebrew Bible. And it's a pagan symbol, and what do rabbits, mean in the pagan world? And I think, we're all familiar with the phrase "breed like rabbits," which is because rabbits are a fertility symbol, and of course that reflects the fact that they tend to have a lot of offspring. And here you can see the rabbits they form a triangle, or a kind of Trinity-esque shape that's composed of three Vesica Pisces, for those of you familiar with that shape, which is kind of this, a Vesica Pisces is formed from taking two circles and the intersection between them, so like a Venn diagram. And then of course we should never forget the triangle with the circle imposed in the center, which is a big Illuminati symbol. And of course, the rabbit is most kind of prominent and has the most kind of obvious intrusion into the religious life of Christians as the Easter Bunny. And we need to ask ourselves as Christians, why is on the greatest holiday of our faith, which is, again, the resurrection is the most important part of Christianity, why is there a rabbit here? And why is this kind of taking our focus away from Christ and the resurrection and focusing on the Easter Bunny? And don't get me wrong, I love chocolate and I love the Easter Bunny, and it was a fun kind of thing when I was a kid, but you kind of have to ask why. Why a rabbit? There's any number of other animals that they could have picked. And of course, we also know that a kind of common slang for hidden things or stuff we have to kind of look for are called Easter eggs. You might say, oh, well, there's some Easter eggs in this movie, if you know where to look. Or the director, he put in Easter eggs. And I think that, again, with this whole symbolism and occult world, we're always kind of looking for Easter eggs. We're always looking, when we see an image, we should say, okay, well, what are these symbols, and maybe is there a hidden message here? And again, it just kind of shows that this whole universe of conspiracy, occult, spirituality, it all kind of uses the same language. And here we see from the book of Numbers, Baal Peor, which is one of the other names of one of these Babylonian deities. And of course, we should remember that all these Babylonian deities, whatever their names are really just different disguises that the devil uses to lead people astray. So their names really aren't important. They're just, and when it comes to spiritual things, they're either things from Christ and from God, and then there are things that are from evil. And Baal Peor is definitely an evil thing, and I believe the rabbit symbolism is also an occult and evil symbol. And this is moving another way into kind of how the occult has even infiltrated the most sacred and spiritual parts of Christianity. We can see over here the kind of papal hat that they wear in Roman Catholicism that has its origins to Dagon and the Babylonian fish worship. And so I'm going to go through this slide, and before I begin, I'm going to say this is not a condemnation of all Roman Catholics. Of course, there are many righteous and blessed Roman Catholics, but of course there are also many evil ones as well, just like there are evil members and imposters in all of our faiths, Protestant, Orthodox, whatever you name it. There's definitely going to be some people who are fakers and led astray, and so we need to identify the kind of ways that they reveal themselves so we cannot be fooled by them. So over here we have the whore of Babylon, which is identified by she's sitting on the throne next to a lion or a beast, and she's sipping wine. And of course we know that the whore of Babylon is drunk on the blood of saints, or the wine of the blood of saints. And this lion beast creature is very interesting as well, because we notice it's got a mane, which would suggest that it's a male lion, because female lions do not grow manes. But at the same time, we can also see it has these mammary, or kind of udder appendages, which would say it's a female or a mother lion. But so putting these two things together, we kind of get a hermaphrodite creature. And I've said it before in another video, but hermaphroditism is extremely important to the occult. The idea of combining male and female is in a kind of a natural way. That's kind of seen as the pinnacle of the occult world, which is why their deities like Baphomet are often depicted as hermaphroditic. And then this symbol right here is actually a star of Ishtar, which, going back earlier, remember Ishtar was the owl goddess from Babylon, and we know it's a star of Ishtar because it's got 8 appendages coming out of the center, and that's how you identify that. And then this middle figure here is a priest of the cult of Dagon, and you can see the scales. And the thing that unites all these 3 figures is this strange hat that we see in Roman Catholicism and here. And we should know that this hat unfortunately has pagan connotations to it, and we should be skeptical of the source of these symbols. And this is a really great slide, and it's got some stuff that we're not going to be able to go into in this presentation, but might go into another time. And it basically shows the relationship between these various symbols and kind of disguises that the devil uses. So over here we have Dagon, which is again the Philistine, or it's a Philistine god. I can't read that, but it's also Dagon. And again, all these names kind of are irrelevant because they're just disguises that the devil uses, who of course relates to Poseidon and the merman, which again relates to Capricorn. And Capricorn and the goat and astronomy and astrology obviously have satanic connotations to them, and we can also notice this little spiral here, which again goes back to the golden ratio. And some people might ask why the devil has a pitchfork, and why is he often depicted with this thing? Well, it's not a pitchfork, it was originally a trident, which of course relates back to paganism and Poseidon and Neptune. And I think the reason that we've depicted the devil holding a trident is to remind us that these pagan things are a distraction from Christ, and they're trying to lead us astray. And of course, then we have the dragon, which we already discussed the dragon in an earlier slide. And this was a really interesting verse from Acts, which explains how upon his conversion, Paul, or then I guess was Saul, had scales, like scaly things, fall from his eyes. And I think it's very interesting that whether it's a reptile, a dragon, or a fish, all these things kind of are scaly creatures, and they have scales. So that's something we can kind of keep in our back pocket and realize that kind of scaly things might not have good intentions for us mammals and us human things. And this is another symbol relating back to the lion, and the previous slide we saw, the whore of Babylon was next to a lion. And this particular carving is from a church, and it's a depiction of the demiurge. And in one of my other videos I discuss the demiurge, which is essentially a Gnostic concept, and the Gnostics believe that Yahweh of the Old Testament is actually the demiurge, this weird serpent headed, or the lion-headed serpent, which of course is completely heretical. The Old Testament God is Jesus. They're the Trinity. It's unchanging. But of course, Gnostics don't believe this. And the Bible even warns us, though, about the demiurge and the kind of lion and snake combination, because it tells us we shall tread upon the lion and the adder, and the lion and dragon shall thou trample under feet. And again, you can dismiss that as a coincidence, but all these symbols reoccur throughout the Bible, and they reoccur throughout occult practices, and they reoccur even in pop culture, in our government, and our institutions. So we should really pay attention to them and try to understand what these symbols mean, because they have a lot to teach us, and they're very old. In fact, the lion goes all the way back to Egypt, and of course a famous Egyptian lion is the Sphinx. And the Sphinx is an amazing structure. It's probably much, much older than the mainstream Egyptologists credit it for. Those of you who are interested, I highly suggest looking into the work of Graham Hancock and The Fingerprints of the Gods lectures, which give a really good overview of kind of antediluvian pre-flood history. And just as a quick aside, the kind of deterioration here caused by weathering would only be possible on a structure that's at least 10,000 years old. So I really believe that the Sphinx is as a remnant of this pre-flood civilization that existed approximately 10,000 years ago. And the Bible warns us about the lion. He says he's roaming, seeing who he can devour. And tying back to the importance of symbolism and the ability to interpret symbols, the Sphinx was actually famous for its riddle, and you could only pass the Sphinx if you could, or it would devour you if you got the riddle wrong. And the riddle is the famous what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs at night. And of course the answer is a human being, because as children we crawl around on all 4s, and then in kind of middle of our lives we walk on 2 legs upright. And then as we age and get old in the evening, we have to use a cane, so it's 3 legs. And I think this hidden in this kind of silly little riddle is the truth of the importance of being able to think in terms of symbols. Because if you look at what the literal riddle is, it's saying what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs at night. But a human life is more than a day, or is it? Because a person who interprets that riddle literally will never get it right, because you have to understand that day could mean an entire life. It doesn't necessarily mean a literal day. And in the same way, especially when 3 legs in the evening, well, is a cane really a leg, or is it an appendage? But the ancients didn't see a distinction in these things. They understood, and we can understand to this day, that we can speak symbolically, and we can speak and use words that don't necessarily literally mean their common meaning, but can have multiple meanings, and we should familiarize ourselves with what these sort of meanings are. And another really, really important symbol is the bull. And this is actually a carving of the Egyptian god Apis, who was the bull god. And as I mentioned earlier, the Egyptians really were kind of the first to get into a lot of this occult stuff that we're aware of. And it's no coincidence that the golden calf was kind of one of the greatest sins of the people of Israel after they got freed from Egypt. God has just given them their freedom, and of course, what do? They create an idol of a golden calf and make a molten image and ignore the kind of blessings that God has given them. And here we can see the bull as its Babylonian kind of name, called Molech or Moloch. And unfortunately, Moloch is still worshipped to this day at places in the like Bohemian Grove or other occult spaces, and child sacrifice and all kinds of horrible rituals are associated with Moloch. And the Bible warns us about wild oxen, and again here's another lion. And again, these symbols aren't coincidental. They aren't coincidental, and they're important. And we can even see that Moloch, or the golden calf, or the graven image is found in the most obvious place. It's right outside Wall Street, and there's no coincidence, really, when you think about the idea that what is the golden calf really about? If you kind of interpret that story, you see that it's the tribe of Israel, the people of Israel thought that, they themselves freed themselves from Egypt, and it's the idea that they've started worshiping the things of their own hands instead of being grateful and thankful of accepting God's grace. They began to take credit for it themselves. Well, go back to Wall Street, and isn't that Wall Street is so often used as an indicator of how healthy our society is? We'll say, oh, well, things are doing great, the Dow is up, or we'll say, the markets are doing really well, we must live in a prosperous, great society. But of course, that's not true. The markets don't have anything to do with our spiritual lives, which is, of course, what really matters. And, the golden calf and the molten image is right there for all to see. And, of course, I'm familiar with the phrase, the bull market, and, that's what the kind of mainstream interpretation of this bull is always just refers to bull markets. But I think if you look at the history here, and especially the associations with money and gold, and Wall Street and greed and all these kind of occult ideas, you'll see that the Wall Street bull might not be quite as innocent as it appears. And even you can look at this, it's not a very happy looking bull, it's a kind of sinister looking creature, and I think, that's not on accident. But we need to remember that despite, a massive amount of financial power and military power and all these other things that these occultists and Satanists have, the thing that they don't have is the power of God and the Holy Spirit, which is ultimately the only thing that matters, because it is what gives us the ability to do anything. And I really think that this generation is especially anointed by God to kind of rebuke all this evil and occult symbols that have really kind of become mainstream. And God calls us all to be like Moses, and we all should follow Moses' example, where we should get off of the mountain and get thee down to the people, which brought us out of the land of Egypt, because they've corrupted themselves. So us as spiritual people, we really have to participate in the spiritual fight that's going on between good and evil, and of course we will be victorious because we have Christ on our side. And so again, I thank you all for spending this time with me and going on this journey, and I hope that this video was informative, and I pray that God blesses your life. And